using E' and English minus absolutisms to provide self-empathy. Each person thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing themselves. Leo Tolstoy. First, find at peace with yourself. Then at least some peace in the world occurs. Thomas Merton. Our self-talk, when describing ourselves, can have a significant effect on our health and well-being. Can it make us sick? According to Stephen Levine, if we heard a couple at a table to us speaking to each other in a way we speak to ourselves within our minds, we wouldn't find an ability to eat our meal when our waiter brought it. We'd feel too nauseated. Last semester, I created an upper-level undergraduate course on compassionate nonviolent communication. I came up with an idea after noting how frequently I heard students naming, blaming, and shaming themselves, saying things like "I'm a moron" or "I'm lazy," and labeling themselves with words such as ugly, stupid, slow, and foolish. They seemed to take their labels as facts. One student who frequently said "I'm stupid" started to see himself as stupid, and another who frequently said "I'm ugly" began to think of herself as ugly. This young woman later told me she had slashed her arm with a razor. Out of curiosity, I asked my students how many knew someone who engaged in self-mutilating behaviors. Each student raised a hand. I asked about eating disorders, and most students said they knew of someone with one or more eating disorders. These students also admitted to frequently describing themselves with negative labels when talking to others or to themselves. I decided to begin this course by focusing on these judgmental labels. If peace really begins at home, I figured I would try to change how students spoke about themselves. If we could learn to speak about ourselves in more discerning, non-judgmental ways, imagine how much changes would naturally occur in ourselves, our families, our communities, even in our country and earth. I chose a model for nonviolent communication (NVC) provided by Marshall B. Rosenberg, founder of Center for Nonviolent Communication, author of Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. NVC process teaches people how to resolve conflicts peacefully. With help of NVC, we learn to work out differences between people, groups, and countries. NVC follows a simple four-step process: observations, feelings, needs, and requests. 1. Observations: concrete actions we observe that affect our well-being. 2. Feelings involve how we feel in relation to what we observe. 3. Needs, a key part of NVC, deal with the needs, values, desires, etc., that create our feelings. 4. Requests refer to concrete actions we request in order to enrich our life. NVC enables us to meet needs of others without sacrificing our own. As its title, A Language of Life, Rosenberg's book indicates, such nonviolent, compassionate communication represents not only a skill and a language, but also a way of thinking, and a way of living. It involves moving beyond black and white thinking to seeing sentient beings as alive, interrelated, and worthy of our concern. The first edition of Rosenberg's book contained no chapter on speaking to ourselves with empathy. His second edition includes one chapter on the subject, but less than 2 pages deal with how to speak to ourselves in empathic ways. In this brief section of his book, Rosenberg teaches readers how to empathize with both our chooser and our educator. Our chooser acted in past situations, ways we now regret. Our educator deals with present feelings and needs. Let's look at an example. You painted your new apartment until 3 a.m. When you got home, you screamed at your wife. Our chooser might say, "I felt exhausted and overwhelmed because I needed rest and understanding. I felt angry because I wanted acceptance." Our educator might say, "I now feel angry at myself because I prefer to act with respect and cooperation." Rosenberg has developed a useful model for giving ourselves empathy. He provides effective ways for speaking to ourselves less judgmentally. Many books recommend that we speak compassionately to ourselves, but few indicate how to do this as Rosenberg does. While teaching Rosenberg's method of speaking to ourselves with empathy, I also told students to imagine that a friend said to them exactly what they said to themselves. How would they respond? In short, I taught golden rule in reverse: treat ourselves as we would treat others. Speak to ourselves as we would speak to others. Still, I found this problem's sheer magnitude quite overwhelming. Even after learning Rosenberg's method of giving empathy to our chooser and educator, Several students almost daily told me they existed as horrible, disgusting, foolish, nerdy, and so forth. These students fell into a major trap. Their word structure implied a one-to-one, direct, factual relationship between the subject themselves and the predicate horrible, disgusting, etc. How else could I teach students how to speak to themselves with kindness and in a way that reflects reality? Here, some methods that evolved from general semantics came to my rescue, especially techniques of E' and English-Absolutisms EMA, which helped to reduce judgmental terms. I felt confident that if we succeeded at finding more ways to teach students and ourselves how to stop naming, blaming, and shaming, then we can really say, peace begins at home. E' involves writing without choosing forms of verb, to be. As I've found with my students, saying I am stupid results in equating oneself with stupidity, leaving no room for other possibilities. No difference between I am a jerk and I feel dirty. One reason for speaking or thinking in E' stems from an assertion that using verb to be results in identification and a sense of permanent, final, complete, sameness, which leads to rigidity and stagnation of thinking. Such identification leads to dogmatic conclusions and generalizations and to confusing words with things. E', by eliminating to be verbs, forces speakers to use active verbs, and changes what we say from a statement of fact to descriptions of processes or conditions. Positive labels have problems that negative ones do. Saying I'm beautiful rather than I'm ugly still causes people to identify themselves with their looks. Saying I accept myself as beautiful fits a form of E', but not its spirit. Beautiful becomes a fact rather than an evaluation. I have less concern about positive labels, however, because in my 26 years of teaching, I have not heard a single student say, I'm beautiful or I accept myself as beautiful, while I've heard scores of students say, I'm ugly. Certainly, problems result when people identify themselves with their appearance or any other quality. I've read of models and athletes who cannot deal with normal aging processes. Had they not defined themselves by their physical attributes, they might have had fewer of these problems. English-Absolutisms EMA involves avoiding uses of all-inclusive absolute words such as always, all, every, etc. and all-exclusive words never, none, nobody, etc. When students say, I'm a jerk, they usually imply always. Consider different messages given by I'm a jerk versus I acted like a jerk last night at that restaurant. Replacing absolutistic language with specific details orients statements in time and place, providing context. Deleting absolute terms gives a more precise portrayal of reality, acknowledging that we never know everything, reinforcing that words and people change over time, and moving simplistic ideas closer to their actual complex realities. Removing implied always term prevents labeling positive or negative from crystallizing into identification. Changing our verbal construction also changes cognitive processing and psychological effects inherent in verbalization. Finally, I advocate deleting loaded words such as idiot or stupid that communicate judgment. Combining deletion of loaded words with E' and English-Absolutisms gives us a three-step model which helps us make observations of experience, what we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, rather than leaping to abstractions not relating to facts. Replacing loaded words with less emotional, more precise words forces us to distinguish between subjective opinions and verifiable facts and to think in gradations rather than in black and white terms. Consider an example, an incident that actually happened to me. When I cut my finger while peeling a mango, I said to myself, how stupid. I'm a jerk. I'm always screwing up. Later, when I used my three-step model, I said, last Thursday, when cutting a mango, I inadvertently pushed a knife into my finger. And I now have an infected finger. Once I started noticing it, I recognized that I labeled myself or called myself names far more often than I expected. While one incident of labeling may have limited effects, considering cumulative effects over time. Look at these differences in wording examples. I'm a pig versus I ate twice as much as I usually do at dinner tonight. I'm slow versus I missed a green light on Main Street today. I'm such an idiot versus I burnt my toast this morning. I'm such a loner versus no one has sent me an instant message for 2 hours. I'm too needy versus Sally chose not to get together with me tonight. I'm a failure versus I received a grade of D on this chemistry test. I'm such a klutz versus I knocked over a plant this morning. I'm ugly versus I look tired today because I slept for only 3 hours last night instead of my usual 7. I'm selfish versus I bought myself an extra pair of shoes at the mall today. We can see by these examples that E' and English minus absolutisms allow us to take a more empathic view of our own behavior, aligning our evaluations more closely to natural life processes. General semantics moves language study away from philological concerns and towards psychological ones. We study an instrument, and also people using that instrument. We realize that we live in a process-oriented world with an ever-changing environment. We understand that a word's meaning does not come from something in that word, but from how we speak and hear and feel about it. Giving ourselves empathy by using E' and English minus absolutisms helps enable two of Alfred Korzybski's extensional devices: indexing and dating. Indexing student sub 1, does not exist student sub 2, helps us to notice, accept, and respect differences by indicating individuality despite similarities. Dating Susie student sub 2005, differs from Susie student sub 2000, helps us to orient language in space and time. Steve Stockdale, Executive Director of Institute of General Semantics, writes about 13 common symptoms of language misbehavior. Using E' and English minus absolutisms allows us to sidestep most language mistakes he describes. At times, Dr. Rosenberg's nonviolent communication model does not work for me because I do not want a heart-to-heart relationship with some people. But, we need a heart-to-heart relationship with ourselves. We have little choice. We cannot make our inner voices shut up. Our lives will function more smoothly and happily when we develop a heartfelt partnership with ourselves. E', English minus absolutisms, and avoidance of judgmental words provide important steps in embracing and empowering ourselves. Speaking to ourselves in judgmental, loaded, or derisive ways takes a cumulative toll. Name, blame, and shame make living a no-win game. When we act as our own enemy, we cannot see our unique qualities that make us special human and humane beings. Rosenberg quotes Murray, a main character in play, 1,000 Clowns, arguing with social workers about placing his nephew in public school. "Before I give him over to you, I want to make sure he won't learn how to become a dead people. I want him to get to know exactly how much of a special thing he exists to me, or else he won't notice it when it starts to go. I want him to know about a subtle, sneaky, important reason he got born a human being and not a chair." Unfortunately, most of us have learned to label ourselves. As babies, we do not speak negatively about ourselves, we do not label ourselves, we do not speak violently about ourselves. Somewhere along our way through life, we develop these destructive habits. But, what we learn, we can unlearn. We can change how we speak about ourselves in our self-talk and in talking to others. As someone trying to reduce her own negative labeling and name-calling, I admit that this three-step model I have proposed takes patience. As with Rosenberg's nonviolent communication process, reducing how often I label myself involves learning a new language. My model requires ongoing practice, but just think of what could result. I cannot begin to express what healing and empowerment I feel from my efforts to become aware of, accept, and appreciate myself. Helping my students to fall in love with themselves represents a joy in teaching. Speaking empathetically to ourselves necessarily translates into speaking empathetically to others. If we speak to ourselves with discrimination, compassion, and kindness, we will likely speak to others so. In other words, when we no longer speak to ourselves with violence, almost automatically we extend meanings of self as a word. We then see ourselves in others and others in ourselves. We glimpse an inherent interrelationship of life forms. I agree with Thich Nhat Hanh's words, a Zen master, and Nobel Peace Prize nominee, we do not born to hold a gun, we get born to love. Love seems a weapon we need. To his comments I would add that nonviolence begins with loving speech towards ourselves, grounded in reality. By speaking to ourselves in affectionate, non-judgmental, and non-absolutist ways, we create a ripple effect, naturally creating more love on earth. When we communicate with love, integrity, authenticity, and compassion, we become less likely to label others and to speak in dogmatic generalizations. Rather than punish mistakes, we learn from them. We convert our judgments of ourselves and others into observations. How wonderful if E' and English minus absolutisms can help us to see our uniqueness and to speak to ourselves with more compassion and accuracy.